One of the last things we have to do to set up our application in Kubernetes is set up some different environment variables. So as a quick reminder, we've got a handful of environment variables that need to be assigned to both the multi-server and the multi-worker. The multi-worker needs to know how to connect to Redis through the environment variables of Redis host and Redis port. The multi-server needs to know the same thing, and the multi-server also needs to have a set of environment variables to tell it how to connect to Postgres as well. So in this section and the next couple, we're going to describe and discuss how we set up environment variables in Kubernetes. All right, now in this diagram, I took these same environment variables and I did a little bit of color coding. So first off, let's talk about the meaning behind the yellow color inside of here. So this, and this, all the yellow ones are going to essentially be consistent, constant values. And we don't have to do a lot of work to set these up inside of our different deployment definitions. All the yellow ones are going to be pretty darn straightforward. Now there's two red ones on here as well. So the two host values, these are also going to be constant values that do not need to change over time or anything like that. But I want to remind you about the purpose of the host environment variables. These are essentially URLs of sorts that are going to tell multi-worker and multi-server how to connect to Redis and Postgres in the first place. In other words, how it can actually reach out to the running Postgres server or the running Redis server and make a connection to them. So with that in mind, I want to remind you about the kind of overall architecture of our application. Remember that we've got our Redis pod right here and Postgres pod right here. And we had said that the multi-worker and the multi-server are going to connect to both those different pods through the use of that cluster IP service. So we need to understand how we can tell multi-worker to connect over to this Redis pod somehow through this cluster IP service. And we're going to do this by providing a value to the Redis host environment variable and the PG host environment variable as well. So let me just tell you, let's get down to basics here. It's a real straightforward thing. Essentially, all we have to do is say, okay, we want to form a connection from our deployment of multi-worker over to the Redis pod that is being managed by the cluster IP service. So all we have to do is provide a host name of the name of that cluster IP service. If you open up your code editor and find the cluster client cluster, no, not that one, where is it? There it is, Redis cluster IP service right here. Remember, we had given it a name of Redis cluster IP service. That's going to be the host name. So you can kind of imagine that we're going to connect to http:// Redis cluster IP service. Now, there's not going to actually be the HTTP on there. I just put it on there to make you understand that this is kind of like a URL, and to connect from one pod over to another, we just provide the name of that cluster IP. All right, so that's not too bad. So in total, all the first set of environment variables, like all these up here, they're going to essentially be constant values. And we just have to go around to our different pod deployment configurations and add in a little bit more config to say, hey, here's an environment variable of like Redis host, and here's the value for it. Same thing for the port, same thing for the user, everything straight down. Now, the one value in this entire list here that's going to kind of stick out like a sore thumb that we're going to do a little bit of additional work on is going to be the PG password. So PG password is a password to our Postgres database. And without a doubt, we probably do not want to stick this as a constant value or just in plain text inside of our Kubernetes config files. And so we're going to do a little bit more extra work above and beyond for the PG password, and we're going to learn how to manage secrets or secret variables inside of our Kubernetes cluster. But we're going to first do all the setup for all these other ones, and then we'll tackle the PG password at the very end. So let's take a quick break right here. When we come back to the next section, we're going to start setting up our environment variables for the multi-worker and multi-server.